I'm pretty excited about today's guest. We have Danny Keith, a longtime Santa Cruz, just all-around Santa Cruz-y person, and current, not really marijuana entrepreneur, but we'll get into that. But we're going to be talking about weed today, and it was super foggy on the way up here, and it was just kind of very stereotypically perfect for a marijuana show. But, very important, I have to read this first. As a non-commercial educational radio station, KZSE supports free expression of ideas. Please be aware that the opinions expressed are those of the speakers or artists only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the UC Regents, KZSE staff, management, or underwriters, although it could. Some of them are cool people. We welcome your feedback on our programming. Please direct your comments to the Program Review Committee at 831-459-4726 or by email at prc@kzse.org. Really quickly, we're working on a documentary about the station, so if you're a longtime underwriter, longtime listener, if KZSE is super important to you, I would love to hear from you and possibly put a couple words in our documentary about the station. It's its 50th year this year, and my email is dan.woop@gmail.com, or you can hit up Daniel Wootan, Wootan, on Facebook if you would like to get a hold of me and be part of that documentary. But today we are talking about weed. You can share your comments or questions as well by calling into 831-459-4036, which will lead you straight to the air room, which is strictly for comments and questions about the show, not promotions, not anything else like that. You can also text in at 831-459-4036. I will be very insistent that you use complete sentences when you do that, because I'm happy to read your questions and comments on the air for Danny, but I don't want to sound like I'm reading SMS on the air. It doesn't get your message across well, and it makes me sound like an idiot. That chuckling in the background is Danny Keith. I did just get a call for a weed-related song. Trust me, I've lived in Santa Cruz for 32 plus years. I know a lot of songs about weed. Unfortunately, I don't know if I have the rights to play any of them unless like the Expendables want to call up and give me the rights over the air. Yeah, over the air.
For two.
Yeah, but thank you for the call. Again, that was someone jumping in, getting involved in the world. 831-459-4036. And yeah, so I do like to podcast these shows later. We're a little backlogged, but I will have previous episodes that I'm super stoked about up soon. But the thing about podcasts is that I can broadcast a song right now, but then I'd have to edit it out to podcast it, because podcasting, for people out there, is essentially putting up a permanent copy of something. So I'd be distributing someone else's music. So can't play Peter Tosh at the moment, unfortunately. But Danny, how's it going, man?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Finally let you talk here.
No, I love it.
And I just have to get my bad on the air record for our mutual mix-up last time you were going to be on. I learned the lesson to go back to my house and get my phone if I was tired and left without it, because you did leave me about 6 messages trying to get a hold of me when you were
I need
mixed
to
up
pay
there.
attention to where I'm supposed to go. That would have helped.
Yes, we're just Santa Cruz
That's why we're here
stereotypes.
talking about cannabis.
We're Santa Cruz stereotypes, and that way we were supposed to do an interview about very serious political Santa Cruz issues, which we got a little bit of in at the last 20 minutes of a show because it was awful. Awful mix-ups. But we are here to talk about a more fun topic, and it's weed. And when I wrote this little intro earlier, it was the perfect weather on the Central Coast for talking about weed, but it did get pretty sunny. So if you're walking out of your house and you thought you'd smoke a joint and go down to the coffee shop, it might be pretty bright out for you at this point.
Sunny.
Yes, and it's beautiful. But I want to talk to you about something that people think of weed. I think people that aren't involved in weed, don't smoke weed, don't really, whether they hate it or they just aren't in that world, they think of weed as a thing where someone buys a plant material that's smoked, and that's weed. That's the world of weed to them. Whether it's bad the way it's sold or good, I'm not saying that, but they think of weed as a plant that people smoke. And you are involved in something that I don't think people think of when they think of marijuana. Can you talk about the new company you started, Cannabis Club TV, to introduce it to people? And eventually we will let people join in the conversation, but we'll get some intros here first. What is Cannabis Club TV?
So Cannabis Club TV is an in-dispensary broadcast network. We actually broadcast on your mobile phone, on the computer, and eventually, probably in the next 30 days, a Roku. And what that does is it allows cannabis-based content. We have 14 different categories across 40 different channels that talks about cooking and CBD and how to grow. And there's some comedy in there and some entertainment. But really, it's one of the very few vehicles legally that you can market a brand directly to a customer who is highly undereducated usually because they're a new customer to cannabis. Like you said, a lot of new people coming on board.
So also, to back up, on January 1st, 2018, marijuana started being sold legally, quote unquote, for recreational purposes, and I'll get into that terminology later. But do you feel that a lot of people are actually coming around to trying weed because it's legal that maybe didn't before? Or why would you say new people are coming around to knowing about this substance, plant, whatever?
There's a couple states that flipped rec before Cali did. And so I think, it's funny how the humans work. As soon as like somebody that is outwardly using something, how many times do we ask our friends what their doctors are giving them for a prescription or whatnot? Same thing with cannabis. I have, when you said earlier, like a lot of people's perception, I'm thinking almost everybody I run into now asks me about cannabis in some form. Like is there a topical? Is there, what do I smoke? Like, what's the best way? And so, again, going back to what we created, which is, humans are, people in general receive marketing a lot better when they're entertained. And so a lot of times in dispensaries, there's not a lot of stuff going on. A lot of them have great ambiances, but not all of them have, visual. And so this gives people who are waiting in the waiting room a chance to kind of just watch content and then see an ad for something that they may want to consume.
And as far as advertisements, what are some highlights? Maybe I'm not saying like favor certain companies over others, but what are the types of industries that are going up as advertisements first off on your Cannabis Club TV?
So there's a lot of different categories. I came from the NBA, so my job was to sell sponsorships, and we looked at every potential advertiser as a category. So the categories that we're seeing a lot of obviously are flower, edibles, oils. The traditional ones that you'd think of, but there's insurance agents. Like we work with OG Cannabis Insurance. We work with, an attorney that represents people on how to get licenses. We work with real estate companies that are selling, 420 friendly properties. We're obviously working with flower companies like premier ones like Candescent and Flav, are in there, working with great dispensaries. So it's a little bit all over the place, and we are primarily only allowing brands or companies that are involved in the cannabis space to advertise. And so right now it's 100% cannabis.
Would that include like cannabis inspired clothing companies,
Sure,
anything like that? So any sort of paraphernalia, like same with skateboarding, like it would be like anything with weed labels on it type of a thing.
Yeah, mostly we're working with 100%, like, so Sir Cannabis Apparel is a company that works with us that is just strictly, cannabis clothing. That's an interesting question. Like, would I let a skateboard deck company advertise? If it fits, yeah.
No, I meant like skateboarding companies putting skateboarding stuff on clothing, the same as weed companies putting stuff on like coffee cups and shirts and sweatshirts and all that stuff.
There's no shortage of clothing out there for the cannabis consumer, that's for sure.
And something that kept popping up and continues to pop up, and I'm just I laugh at it because I was a huge stoner for a long time, and it's, I guess maybe because I grew up in California, I don't know how it is in other places necessarily, but everyone, when they're asked about weed being legal now, someone always uses the word alley or back alley. And it bothers me so much because I understand that like criminalizing weed has been a horrible thing for a long time, but I feel like it almost makes it sound sort of exaggerated when people are like, oh, you had to go to a back alley to buy weed before. And like Santa Cruz has had a lot of couches and living rooms for a long time. And I'm just trying to piece together I just like honest debates.
Yeah.
And it's like when a 65-year-old says that, they had to go to a back alley to buy weed like in 2013, how do you feel about that phrasing, back alley? Because it always pops up.
It's such a, black market comes up a lot, gray market comes up a lot. There's still a little bit of that going on, especially down in Southern California. There's still a lot of illegal dispensaries. I personally never purchased my cannabis in a back alley, but, I do live in Santa Cruz. We're a little bit spoiled here. So I just think, again, it's stigma, right? And that's really why I started, with a couple of buddies, started Cannabis Club TV, because we wanted to change the stigma and we wanted to change the narrative.
Speaking of changing the narrative, I think I have a caller on the line here. Do we have you still?
Yes.
Hello. Where are you calling from?
Hi. Sorry. I was just driving and kind of popped along this. I wanted to comment on the whole legalization part, particularly since it's a UCSC, not podcast, but radio station, and just how actual legal the industry totally screwed over a lot of students.
In what industry screwed over students, or the laws screwed over students?
Well, the legalization of marijuana totally screwed over a lot of students. Just specifically at UCSC, I was a student there, and how many people were involved in the industry. And then as soon as legalization happened, I know you guys are talking about the stigma and all that stuff, but when the legalization happened and all that stigma went away, the black market kind of decreased, and that's where a lot of the students were getting money to fund their education. And I don't know. It piqued my interest, this podcast or the radio.
Yeah, I guess I would just ask as a response to that, do you know of any of those people that used to fund their lives in some way, at least with black market weed sales? Have any of them made moves to get jobs with dispensaries or start dispensaries or help grow or help make extracts or clothing related to it?
Sorry, will you repeat that again? I'm on.
Have you had anyone? Have you had anyone that you know get involved in the legal part of the industry now that it's not black market?
I mean, yeah, I have. I still am. But it's, I guess, before it went legal, there were so many aspects of the industry that you could jump in, hold down another job, and still make enough money to do higher education. Whereas now, even when you're in the legal part of this industry, the prices have dropped, but the amount of time and energy that goes into growing and trimming and all that stuff hasn't decreased. So
right.
Where I used to make $50 to $100 an hour, it's now closer to 15 to 25.
Absolutely. I'm very familiar with that.
That's not, that is what the market of all regular jobs is right now. But it was kind of a bummer because it took kind of one of these last remaining industries where you as a human could go and do it, put a lot of effort into it, and then
right.
gain enough money to do better in life. And now it's kind of where
I get you. I get you.
Can't.
I can address that, but thank you so much for your call. Thank you. I get that, and actually, I've had long conversations about that. The transition to legal market has made a lot of the wages drop, and honestly, talking with friends that run farms, whether it's indoor warehouses or outdoor, I had to talk with basically my brother, my best friend in the whole world, and he's about to get out of it, but that might not fit in the show. But we talked about it, where it's people would come up and they would trim weed for $50 an hour for a couple months, and then they'd go party and go to festivals for 6 months, and that's an awesome life, and I love that caller got to do that. But honestly, it was partly the risk you were taking of working in an illegal industry. They paid you more. And B, they didn't want you to be mad at them and
rat them out
or do anything that could harm their business. So they're going to pay you a ton to do it. But if you look at it seriously, weed trimming, if you're not committed, if you're not the person, like, there's less jobs and the people are doing more things at the jobs now, because you can't just roll up and expect to make $50 an hour at any industry if you're not really committed to that industry in some way. I work room service. I'm very committed to it and I make good money doing it. But like the people that come into my job and work for 2 months and leave, they get busser jobs. You know, like you're going to get trimming work, and trimming work is actually pretty easy work. So it's like, yeah, growers are going to pay 10 to 18 bucks an hour for that, because it is kind of minimum wage, simple work, honestly.
I mean,
how do you see the jobs changing in your side of it?
Well, down in Long Beach, for example, one of my friends owns a dispensary down there, and all of their bud tenders have to be part of a union. You know, they get some benefits, they get some protection.
And bud tenders, you mean the people at the clubs that are very knowledgeable about the produce, the production.
So as much as you would get paid $50 an hour, you could also potentially turn up missing. Like it was like you said, the risk versus reward. It's basic economics. So I've had a lot of friends who've, used to get $4,000 or $5,000 a pound and now getting $600 and $700 a pound. And that's brutal because the consumer's still paying the same dollar amount, but there's obviously some very high imposed testing that goes along with that too. So the money, it's not like the dispensary's making all the money. There's labs that are in the way. There's excise taxes on both sides. I think the average is 30% tax plus sales tax for an area. So that's going to the state to fund the bureau to help create a legal industry so that it can sustain and scale and not collapse.
And that kind of leads somewhat smoothly to a question about that, is that, yeah, it's legal. A lot of people think once something's legal, you're good. You're good to go. Something's legal. But especially when something's so contentious and has been illegal for a long time, and the history behind how it became illegal in the first place, and then once again, because at times it's gone back and forth. What do you think the next big challenge is in this whole market that is still forming and people are still working in gray areas? And what's the next challenge that you think would be the best thing for both regulators and business people to address to make the transition to legal smooth? Like, what would be the next most important step to figuring out all this gray area?
I'm going to lose people on both sides of the argument when I say this, but
they're high. It doesn't matter.
My thought is this: I get the question too, like, what happens when Philip Morris comes in, or what happens when the big tobacco companies come in? And having been in the surf industry as long as I was, the same problem we had with Nike and other brands that wanted to penetrate the market. And my suggestion, and the next thing that I think that should happen, is, first of all, the Bureau needs to hire people that understand cannabis, that have either grown it, sold it, smoked it, something, right? Like, there's a lot of people that are making laws and creating parameters. And then you have to realize, too, like, real quick, that tobacco and alcohol are the ones that really control the distribution and marketing of cannabis. I mean, mark my words, it's going to be alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, and firearms by the time this thing is done. And cannabis is controlled on the marketing front by tobacco, and it's controlled on the distribution front by alcohol. And so within some parameters, right? And so you have people that are, the majority of the people that are involved are still learning the process, and they're applying a business acumen to it. But then there's a resistance from the space to try to work with the powers that are trying to create the control. And therefore, that's where you have the complete delta of failure between the two, because that's what drives them, somewhat of a robust gray and black market. I mean, people want to keep doing what they want to keep doing, but we operate in 10 states. I talk to people in Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York's rolling out, Ohio's rolling out, Oklahoma's rolling out, Florida's about to, they just are going through their dispensary process. So every state looks back to California to see what California's been doing and then tries to improve it, because it's really complicated here.
And that leads to one of the complications that goes to alcohol too. Good comparison to alcohol is that during Prohibition, you could get a doctor to prescribe you alcohol for many purposes. And then in 1933, when Prohibition ended, for a long time, you could still buy alcohol at a pharmacy. No one buys alcohol in a pharmacy anymore, unless it's Walgreens selling it in
CVS,
another aisle.
Maybe.
Right, it's CVS. But they sell it in another aisle, is what I mean. It's not considered part of the pharmacy.
Right.
It's considered a food, beverage, recreation thing. But for a long time, the pharmacy aspect, the facade or justification, whatever you want to call it, of it as a medical purpose and as a recreational purpose existed side by side. And as time went by, the pharmacy aspect, the medical argument disappeared. And now we have medical dispensaries and recreational dispensaries working side by side, sort of in the same towns. One question, do you see that existing in the future? And does it make the medical argument sound dishonest if medical dispensaries just convert to recreational once it's legal?
So to understand the difference between medicinal and recreational, you have to understand what the requirements are. So with the medicinal play, you have your card as a customer, and you usually pay less taxes. You have access to higher dosing or volume of purchase, right? So recreational is restricted by those three things. So that's you can go get your medicinal card online for $39, and you're off and running. So I do believe that for the newer customer and for the customers that have traditionally always gone to a doctor to get their prescriptions for their normal medication, that's a little bit of a placebo for them to hold on to, and that I think that'll still exist. It also gives the state better tracking, whatever state they're in, because everything's tracked by the person. When you're on recreational, you're still tracked, but it's just a different process. So I think you're going to see, shops want to be recreational. The only place in the entire state that didn't see an uptick almost in cannabis sales when it went AMA was Santa Cruz. And that's because Santa Cruz had their stuff together so well that people were already consuming at a level that was pretty high, right? And so, you're still going to see states. There's tons of counties that have no cannabis laws on their books. They're dry. And so they're going to start with medicinal because that's how they feel. Again, ignorantly, they think that that's the way they control the process, when in reality, they're just throttling revenue and making it more difficult for the dispensaries, the growers, the distributors, everything.
And when you say no laws, actually, I think it's the opposite in the places that you're saying have
they
no
have
laws.
Restricted laws, yeah.
Right, like Riverside County, for instance. Prop 64 actually states that that cities and counties can't prohibit people from having up to 6 plants for personal use as long as their electrical setup's not endangering the community, or having less than an ounce in their possession. But very conservative counties, kind of in the red belt of parts of California, are trying to actually prohibit that. And where does that go as far as them trying to say that they don't want to release their laws from prohibition when the state says literally they can't prohibit it in those counties? How does your business and other people around you, how are you guys dealing with that or coping with that?
So that's a good kind of segue to the advertising component. In those places, that I think it's fear that these city councils and county supervisors of these areas they don't know. And so they're not reaching out to talk to people to have a comfort level, right? Could you imagine not having any alcohol in a city or a county? People would be outraged, And so there are people that are patients that genuinely need their product that have to drive in order to get their product. Advertising wise, these brands, especially in these areas that are just emerging, we're the only vehicle a lot of times besides social media for them to put their product in front of a customer once the dispensary opens in these areas. Not even 6 months ago, Santa Barbara, Ojai, the whole Central Valley, or coast, if you will, I shouldn't say valley, San Luis Obispo, Grover Beach, not really nothing going on. I just went through 15 dispensaries from San Luis Obispo to Santa Barbara that are alive and well and thriving. And I think once the counties and the cities come on board and they start seeing the tax revenue, it's a different tune for them.
And also on the advertising tip, just as tobacco, like you don't see people smoking in TV shows anymore. You don't see it in, obviously in movies you can, because there's a restricted audience sort of, that'd be sort of an artistic infringement. But in certain publications, paper, you can't see certain advertisements of tobacco, or they have to be placed in a certain way. And High Time, something that anyone could buy all this time, is now treated like basically a porn magazine, and it's kept off of the front of the shelf, and you have to be a certain age to buy it. And what do you think about that type of a flip of logic, where when it was illegal, that was always my thing as a kid. It was like, it was way easier for me to get illegal drugs when I was a kid because I needed an ID or a 21-year-old to buy me alcohol. And so that whole thing of like, now that it's legal, you can't get High Times magazine easily. Like that logic can be put on a lot of aspects of this. But what do you think about that whole flipping of logic?
Again, it goes back to people that are, they're taking the phonetic value of it. Like, it's a adult magazine. And so they put it into the adult magazine category when there's no interpretation of what that actually means, It's not like you can't have, it's a 21 and over mag now. Like you can't buy it unless you're 21 and over. You can't buy High Times.
It's more strict than a porn magazine.
Yeah, 18 and up is porn. And
that's pretty funny.
Right. And so unfortunately, because of that, it puts our company in kind of a better spot, because once you're inside a regulated, we're in an age qualified, customer subscribed situation. We don't have to protect ourselves like that. We can showcase content that shows consumption, and we're dealing with clients that have already checked in and authorized themselves to see that. So it's unfortunate that we interpret things so literal, that we put things, and that's going to be a hard thing for a lot of magazines to overcome. That's going to impact purchasing quite a bit.
And I just want to mention, this might segue to a question I have. Someone wrote in a kind of cryptic text. It says, pot nowadays seems weak, ellipsis, except edibles, ellipsis. So maybe they're continuing their comment. I would appreciate that. Do you find anything in this comment? Because honestly, people who are 60 years old who haven't smoked in 20 years, they smoke weed now and they're like, oh my God, this is a real drug. And like literally looking back on like how high I was all the time, like, yeah, it's a real drug for sure. Like weed is a strong drug. I don't mean that in a bad way or anything, but like, it's not just giving you a little head rush and you go off on your day with some strains of weed. Do you feel that weed is weaker now than some unknown time in the past that they didn't specify here?
So I'm sure you'll enjoy this comment. When we were growing up, we everything was driven by strain, right? You would eventually,
and people would just say everything was the strain that sounded really cool, right, whether they knew
sour
or not.
Diesel or wedding cake or gelato or whatever, right? And so now though, we can go, it's kind of like eating food, right? Like you go, let me try that gelato. Didn't do anything for me, or it made me too, like sometimes some of the stuff that my wife will use, and it's like too heady for me. Like I'm more of a sativa guy. And so you're buying the wrong stuff, man. If your pot is weak, like there's some crazy stuff out there that flour tests up. Anything over 26% is going to be solid. The most I think is a little over 34% total THC concentration in flour. In oil, it can be upwards of 92 to 94%. Doesn't mean it's going to get you any more augmented or high. It just means it has a higher concentration of THC.
Which isn't that's the most publicized drug compound.
It's just one of the drug compounds that triggers you, It's like, it just amazes me. People don't go into the liquor store and go, give me 110 proof whiskey. It's like you buy the whiskey that you like, or you buy the beer that you like. And I think that's the same thing with cannabis. Just figure out what you like, and then, experiment a little bit.
Yeah, I think they're messing with us because they just said Thai sticks were stronger. So I think they're just trying to show that they've smoked weed for a really long time.
OG, bro.
Yeah,
you guys are OG.
Thai sticks. It's also a cool...
Tommy would enjoy that comment.
It's also a cool skateboard term. Anyways, but yeah, so on that note about potency of marijuana products, what is this phase 1 and phase 2 testing? And also, if you want to throw it in there, a lot of people have been talking about how their permits are tied up, being revoked, sometimes because of these testing requirements. And obviously we have some time left, but I want to just, if you feel like it, pitching the idea that a lot of people are going back into the black market after applying for permits, not getting them. And what does this testing and that whole mess create for people?
Well, I've watched it roll out to 5 or 6 different states, and almost all of them were a calamity when it came down to it. Again, you have people that are making these testing requirements that are basing them on like food or tobacco, right? And so people have been growing for quite some time. So California got hit with AMA, right? It went legal. And then what people didn't realize is that most dispensaries didn't even open up recreationally until mid-March. They were still medicinal. Long Beach is barely flipping. Believe it or not, Santa Cruz
and San Diego were basically the first two that were on top of it, and it was really interesting. Yeah.
It's because they paid attention, right? Our county supervisors embraced it. The city council embraced it. Maybe they didn't like it, didn't matter. They realized it was coming. Rather than put their head in the ground, they got their arms around it. They tried to recognize the space. They tried to give it an opportunity. So AMA comes. That kind of...
Can you describe what AMA is?
Adult use. I don't know what the M and the A stand for.
It's the name of the act, though.
Yeah, so it's adult use.
It's your educated name for the...
Prop 64, right? And so that came, and that kind of hit people T-boned, right? And then they kind of wobbled out of it. And then the testing, phase 1 testing really started being implemented, which was, a higher, instead of parts per million, it went to parts per billion. They were widening their tests on pesticides.
Adding CBDs and all of those into there.
And then there was also packaging requirements that hit at the same time. So you had packaging requirements, you had medicinal versus recreational, you had now adult use, which was a change, and you have phase 1 testing. Okay, so the brands kind of stumble out of that. A lot of brands got their license, realized they didn't have a distributor, and they were stuck. Like they're like, oh, I have my manufacturing and other permit, but I can't distribute it to the dispensary because I don't have a distribution license. So then there was a scramble for brands to find distribution. Some of the bigger distribution companies failed because their brands didn't get all the licenses that they need to do. They didn't get their packaging in compliance. And ultimately, it's the dispensary that's going to be where the Bureau regulates it, because that's where they go in and just test, seed to sale. Like, are your tests compliant? Or is that's not packaging compliant? That needs to go back. They don't go to the brands. They don't go to the manufacturers. And then we'll carry this on after the break.
Yeah. I was going to let you keep going.
Okay.
But that's perfect, though. We will carry it on after the break. And I want to talk about the people who aren't thriving in this new economy, the people being shut out of it that may or may not have done an honorable job of trying to do the right thing. We're going to go to a quick break real quick. I got a couple announcements, and we'll be back with Danny Keith here on KZSC Santa Cruz. This is Unquestionable. We're talking about the current status of the marijuana market in California about 8 months after, quote-unquote, full legalization of adult use of marijuana.
We're on our tricycle right now. We're kind of riding along on the tricycle trying to figure it out.
It's horrible, but it's great also in a lot of ways. 831-459-4036 that you can call in or text. Our texter is very adamant that the best weed is now grown at homes in sunlight. So
sun-grown is a definite. I prefer sun-grown.
There you go. So we'll be back in a minute to talk more about marijuana. 459-4036 in the 831 area code to share your comments or questions. While the world recovers from natural disasters, Global Giving helps to fight climate change. Global Giving connects charities, people, and companies with local nonprofits to help provide funds, tools, training, and support. More information is available online at globalgiving.org. And SCORE of Santa Cruz County is a nonprofit organization run by working and retired executives and entrepreneurs who volunteer their vast knowledge and expertise and years of business experience. There are a number of great resources that provide information, tips, and interactive workshops to help small businesses succeed. SCORE now offers a Learn Online feature, which offers free workshops on starting, managing, and marketing a business. More information is available at www.santacruz.score.org or by calling 831-621-3735. And we are back with Danny Keith on Unquestionable. We just got a text from someone in a faraway area code.
Where's it from?
It says 989. I always love, because everyone lives with their cell phone now, so it doesn't really matter where you live. A lot of people have their old area code, but I love looking up area codes and finding out where people live.
Yeah, let me look where that's from.
989 area code. Really enjoying this conversation. I'm a young person who's new to Santa Cruz. There you go. There's the answer.
Michigan.
I should have read it.
They're from Michigan.
Okay, and find the level of marijuana use here is really interesting. Wonder what they mean by interesting. If it's good, if it's just like out of control. I'm curious what they mean by that. Interesting is such an interesting word. But before we went to the break, I kind of teased the idea that a lot of people are having trouble finding footing in the new market. And in Colorado, for instance, there's this article from Newsweek from years ago that I still remember. It was called The New Pot Barons, and it was right before Colorado put their legalization through. And it was basically senators in a penthouse of a hotel in Denver, briefcases of cash as campaign contributions, going from basically places, I don't want to blame New York, but places with a lot of money coming in to say, hey, we want to give you campaign contributions to make sure that the law is desirable to the people that we represent. And a lot of people are having trouble finding their footing in the new permitting, the new testing, all of that stuff. My best friend basically is having a mess of a time after doing everything that he could do with lawyers and everything to get the right permitting, get everything set. And there's a lot of people feeling like the authorities are kind of favoring certain groups over others, and they're not really sure why, whether it's like as clear cut as bribery, or if it's like, oh, the police chief's uncle, like literally up north, like it's weird because there's small town communities and you're really not sure how corrupt the whole process is. And have you had friends or associates have a lot of trouble getting involved in the legal side of it and maybe going back towards black market stuff?
Well, like I was kind of, I'll just finish the comment and then hopefully addresses your question.
Absolutely.
You know, so we go from the phase one packaging issues, and then July 1st comes, which is like death day for cannabis. You know, it was brands, you know, I had friends that had 50 strains on the shelf go down to 3. It just increased testing wise. And so I always tell people, sometimes you live before transition, sometimes you live during transition, sometimes you live post transition. We happen to be right in the middle of transition, and it's a bumpy, crazy road. And I think I have had friends that have followed everything to the T and they didn't get it. And then some other people, I mean, look, 99% of life is luck, right place, right time, right opportunity. So unfortunately, even if you do all the right things and cross your T's and dot your I's, you could still end up on the bench. You know, we're now in a time where those things happen. People are influenced. There's corruption taking place. There's reasons. You know, you see Vicente Fox, right? Past president of Mexico, pro-cannabis. You want to know why? He owns a bunch of land that he wants to grow cannabis on in Mexico. So,
and he's not president anymore,
No.
so it's not him profiting as president. But honestly, if you're ever president or governor of a state or a country, you always have that power.
I'm going to tell you, it's a total sidebar from cannabis. Vote. Pay attention to the people you put in office. Pay attention to the people that you are giving this power to.
I don't think that's a sidebar from cannabis at all. I think that's very interrelated.
It's just, it's like if you don't vote and then you complain, like do some research. I mean, the props and all that stuff, it's really hard to keep track of, but the people that we put into office are the ones that make the decisions that impact you. So if you're tired of corruption and if you're tired of people greasing each other, vote them out. Get new people in there, you know? So yeah, to answer your question, I have seen a ton of stuff that happens.
And on that topic, again, in Colorado, we were talking about basically the movement there had a strong backing from legislators to supposedly remove people that were criminals from the industry, which you're saying they need people that know cannabis to be regulating cannabis and to be creating the framework and opening the businesses. And a lot of people, through their protest work and through their activist work in the past, have caught criminal cases and financial problems that ended up being legal matters. But that ends up, if you push everyone out that's quote unquote a criminal, it's kind of a way of purging everyone that knew about it so that other people can come in. And how do you see that? Like, would you be okay with someone with old felonies for marijuana or marijuana related financial things that happened being in the new legal business?
What you're asking me personally?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
I
why?
mean,
yeah.
Because society isn't always right. And, you know, we're criminals right now. The people that are in the space technically are a federal criminal. So, you know, you're just not catching a charge. Look, Tommy did his time. You know, bunch of people did their time so that we could be able to have this opportunity. You know, there is still a lot of people serving heavy sentences for a plant. That doesn't mean that some of these people have done violent things. Those people need to stay where they're at, and they need to not be involved with the cannabis space. But if you've paid your dues and you have a criminal background, and not that you were just flagrantly breaking the law, but you were truly involved in the cannabis space, I have no problem with that person, you know, being in charge of setting regulations. Absolutely. They know best.
And it is kind of an interesting thing to, I guess, transition anything to being legal that's been illegal for so long. I mean, I don't know why this is kind of a way exaggerated example, but I was just thinking of Nelson Mandela. He fights something and is in jail for committing crimes forever, and then he becomes president of the country.
Yep.
The country. And who would you want in charge of weed at the top level if you and your friends could pick it for California or for the United States, let's say?
So who would my pick for drug czar be?
Yeah.
Or cannabis czar?
Yeah.
It's hard for me not to default to Tommy Chong because I've been with him for so long. But from a businessman's point of view, you know, or business person's point of view, there's quite a few people that I feel would rank pretty high. Unfortunately, I think you have to have a social influencer to be able to really, like, in order for someone to have political clout, they have to have some pretty good status in the space. You know, Snoop's a really good businessman. He'd be a great, you know, cannabis czar.
He might not have time, though. He's pretty busy. He's a pretty busy guy.
This is true. I think there's a couple people that
He's like creative director at a record label, and he's got all his clothing
Seth
labels.
Rogen would be another good one. I mean, I'm going towards celebrities because that seems to be what activates people.
He's authentic too, because you can tell he's playing himself in every movie. So yeah,
just
you'd know if he was lying
stoner.
to you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's super great. Okay. Also, as a Santa Cruz person, I have this lined up for Ryan Coonerty as well. Especially with your skate and surf background, what's your favorite Santa Cruz sticker, or the one that makes you laugh the hardest when people move to town and plaster the back of their car with Santa Cruz
there's
stickers?
A starter kit for everybody. I mean, I think it's you put up the dot, you put up usually a pack your trash sticker. I mean, that one is a message that everybody should adhere to. But the funniest ones, I think the Keep Santa Cruz Weird. Like,
okay,
it's classic when you see that one. I just kind of chuckle. And then people just tend to plaster the whole back of their car with surf stickers. You know, they'll have 5 different brands that all sit on their back window. So, you know, kind of like, oh, welcome to town.
Yeah.
How's it going?
Totally. And what's the most incorrect stereotype about stoners that you encounter in your business dealings with someone that you want to be involved or maybe it's a landlord that you want to use a space of, and you have to convince them of some stereotype being incorrect.
Well, we have years of that Spicoli image where, if you smoke weed, you're just kind of ignorant, lazy, and irresponsible. And I think that's changing considerably. People, until I came out of the closet cannabis-wise, they would have never probably known that I was a cannabis user. But just like anything else, you have to use it in moderation. You still have to have your head about yourself. And so the irresponsibility component, I think, is the hardest thing to kind of overcome. People just kind of, are you going to pay your bills, or are you going to pay me all in cash, or who does your books, or is this sustainable? And so it's the irresponsibility component that I think is still lingering a little, but we got people changing that.
Gotcha. And that brings up something that I had forgotten about until now, but a lot of banks won't take money from weed dispensaries, weed advertisement firms, anything related to weed. They won't take their money. So they have to have vaults, and they have to have safes, and they have to have crazy amounts of security. And I just see that as a safety risk for the community, knowing that either on site or somewhere that is known to the owner of the place, there's vast amounts of cash money sitting around.
Yep.
That's a huge, how do we convince legislators that it's a terrible idea that banks don't take the money, because now you have millions of dollars sometimes sitting in a warehouse or in an office building, and that's an invitation to violent crime.
Absolutely. So I sat on the board of a bank for a number of years, and my parting comment was, what are we going to do when there's more money circulating outside of the banks than that's circulating inside the banks? And not only that, but you have the $10,000 limit that triggers certain security issues that goes to the IRS. That,
like if you're on a plane, like if you're getting on a plane, or
I've traveled with,
going across state lines,
a couple stacks, and not had a problem. But yeah, you'd go try to pay for anything with cash. People trip out. They're like, whoa, you got cash. What's going on here? We don't take hundreds. So there are credit unions that will take, deposits from people. The challenge there too is the Delta. They're all federally run banks. And until we can start a bank that's not attached to the feds, or the feds deschedule, and then that lets the banking component come in.
You could have a bank that's not attached to the feds. You just wouldn't have FDIC insurance, which is also an invitation to problems too. The
Treasury, there's been attempts in Colorado. There was a Four Corners community credit union that was going to try to be started, and they got denied their application to the Treasury. So, just like anything else, you have to have a license to have a bank. And so these, if you really understand banks, a lot of banks in the early 1900s were started by farmers. Farmers had banks so that they could transact between each other. We need the same thing for cannabis. We need a cannabis banking system. Blockchain and cryptocurrency are kind of filling that gap, but it's really hard to keep track of Bitcoin when you're trying to go buy cannabis, And so you're going to still see a ton of, there's a problem. We don't have enough, all the zeros that are in the banks don't necessarily represent all the paper money that's in circulation. So when you're pulling out like hundreds of thousands of dollars of capital, it's just, we're going to run out of paper money is what's going to happen. And then the banks will have to figure something out.
I hope not, because that's how I get my tip money. Often from people that grow weed. Some of the best rooms I walk into are just people like celebrating the opening of their club, and they're like on vacation, and they're like, room service, woo! Right. You want some weed? I'm like, I don't smoke anymore, but maybe one of the cooks wants some. Oh, we got a text here. Perhaps it will require a U.S. constitutional amendment to truly legalize pot. This would solve the banking issue?
Yep.
They said a period, but I put a question mark in there, and it's from Bob D. in, I'm going to say Santa Cruz, not South Carolina. What do you think about federal amendment and the potential of that happening before you retire, basically?
Well, you got Booker, who's trying to make some moves on, getting the feds to...
Cory Booker?
Yeah, to back off. Before Rohrabacher put his head up his he was another big, he's done some pretty stupid things.
He's busy in Russia, though.
But he's done some pretty stupid things recently. But he was a big component of protecting cannabis too. So what you need is
That makes it bipartisan.
yes. So what you need is the states that keep making money, the cities that keep making money. That's what's going to change the feds. If they did something like that, that would revolutionize, and also it might cause a backdraft too. So it's got to be tamed and done properly, because if you just open it up all of a sudden and the big guys just come in, it's going to cause a backdraft. And so I think the feds are eyeballing, and when it gets to the amount of states that it feels like it can go onto a federal ballot, then it'll get voted probably, or somebody will step up and actually write, a law that changes that.
And we did talk about a lot of them, but in the last minute or so here, what are like some of the, obviously there's like specialty accountants and specialty attorneys and specialty architects and electricians and clothing designers, and the dude that painted the beautiful mural on the Live Oak dispensary over there by the freeway, and all these specialty pieces of this economy. Just to, again, remind people listening to KZSE Santa Cruz that might not be as familiar with weed as others, what are a couple of the things that people don't think of as part of this economy that we haven't mentioned yet, that are just like very niche to this economy?
Well, you have people that are very passionate about the plant. They're very knowledgeable. They put a lot of pride into that. I mean, one of the things I really love about being in the space is the compassionate kind of undertone of wanting to take care of patients and make sure people get access to medicine. And, I just think most people are not in this space to gouge each other or to take each other out. It does happen. But for the most part, it seems to be like some high ethics. And then, I would just say that cannabis is just another business. When people come to me and ask for advice, I'm like, you need an attorney, you need an insurance agent, you need an accountant, you need a banker, you need the 5 basics to have a business. No different in cannabis. You just have to pay attention, and you might still lose. Nothing is given. It's a lot of hard work, and for us, it took 2 years before advertisers started paying attention. Now they're paying attention. So
awesome. And this has been Danny Keith here with me on Unquestionable. I'm Dan Wu. Thank you so much for listening to KZSE Santa Cruz. And we'll be back next week, I believe, with Ryan Coonerty. I think I tracked him down. Had to invest in some milk carton industry stuff. Found him at the County Board of Supervisors.
We can have a little chat.
Maybe Danny Keith will become like a guest co-host.
Maybe I'll just be your
here.
co-host. That would work great.
You're honestly welcome in here anytime. I think that as the summer goes on, we're starting to get people are remembering who I am, because I haven't been in journalism for a few years, and Ryan Coonerty literally didn't recognize me when he saw me at the meeting, so that was funny. But yeah, we'll be back next week, noon. I'll also be on tomorrow night playing punk tracks from 10 to midnight. My email is dan.woop at gmail.com if you would like to be involved in our documentary we're making about the station. And thanks again, Danny, for coming in, and we will talk next week.